Hello and welcome to UK Column. My name's Debbie Evans and I'm the nursing correspondent for UK Column. And today I'm delighted to be able to welcome two guests. We're delighted to be able to welcome back Alex Kelly. And for those of you that have seen Alex's previous interview before, it will be linked under the description of the video. But Alex very sadly lost her mum, Anthea, as a result of the AstraZeneca vaccine. Alex has been fighting for a very long time and also runs the UK CV Family Bereaved Group. And Alex has been looking for ways in which to raise funds for other people to take legal action, which is what she's had to do to reverse the decision of an inquest and a coroner. And when things get really complicated, what do you do? And Alex, bless her, has followed the path down the line all the way and found an amazing solicitor, a consultant solicitor, Peter Todd. And I'm delighted to be able to welcome Peter as well to the UK Column. First of all, though, before I introduce Peter a little bit more, I'd like to welcome Alex in and say, Alex, thank you so much for arranging this. And please give us an update of where you are and what you're actually trying to achieve and how we can help you today. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you, Debbie, and thanks for having us on. So I've set up the Anthea Kelly Memorial Fund, which is legal support for COVID-19 vaccine injured and bereaved. Because as you explained, my brother and I and my family were fighting to get an inquest for Mum back in 2021, and it was with Peter's help that finally happened. A lot of the vaccine injured and bereaved in the community know of Peter and the amazing work he's done. And so I wanted to do something in Mum's memory that would benefit others, because I've had my truth, and it goes an awful long way to helping you. There's a lot of people that I'm dealing with in the communities, because I'm part of UK CV Family, as you said, but I also support the Truth Be Told campaign, which is trying to get the media to cover us, to give us some support, or at least speak to us. And we're just not getting anywhere. So with the vaccine injured and bereaved, I'm just seeing more people where my brother and I were almost 2 years ago before we found Peter, and just struggling to navigate an incredibly difficult medical legal world. You don't work in that world, you don't know that world, then why would you know how to go forward? Whether it's a death or it's a vaccine injured person who isn't getting the help from their doctors. A lot of the injured are talking about further problems now on top of the injuries they've originally had from the vaccines, because they were ignored. So they've got further problems, further issues. So this fund, and I know very much this is my mum's energy and my brother's energy behind this, because I can't think about anything else. I've just wanted to set this up. And it is so that people who can't afford that legal expertise that Peter has, the fund will help. And that is my aim. It's only been going for 2 weeks, and I've already had amazing patrons step up. It's £1 a month. I do have other tiers of 5, 10, and 20 on there. I've purely put that on because people asked me to. I was, in my naivety, just going to keep it at £1. But I've had some amazing support already. And going forward, we're doing interviews so that I can obviously get the word out there to people to please, if you can. I appreciate times are incredibly tight right now, but if you can do £1 a month and become a patron, you could really be changing lives of people that they're right on the edge. I've said this before, Debbie, we have suicides in the groups. This is very serious. People taking something that their government and the medical world told them was safe, and their lives are now changed. A lot of these people, particularly the injured, were working people. They were paying their taxes. They can't work, a lot of them now. And they really are on the edge. And in terms of the deaths that have gone on and are going on, and okay, this is my opinion, but it's what I'm dealing with in the groups and in the community, they're just being ignored. And so if we can look into something and we can get the patrons on board, then that is what I want to do in my mum's memory. And as I say, without Peter, there would have been no inquest. There would have been no inquest, and the pathologist would not have had the chance to speak up about what his findings were. So I am forever grateful to the work Peter did.
I think this is a very good time, Alex, to actually say that we are seeing a sliding of the vaccine injured from the news, and we're very keen to keep it at the top of the news. And I think maybe now's a very good time to introduce Peter Todd. And thank you so much, Peter, for agreeing to join us. Peter's a consultant solicitor working for Scott Moncrieff Associates Limited. His expertise is in pretty much everything medical, especially challenging the NHS and looking at vaccine injuries. And what I love mostly about Peter's page on his website, on Scott Moncrieff website, is that the statement is Peter is strongly committed to the principle of access to justice for all, regardless of ability to pay, which I think is lovely. And so, Peter, welcome to UK Column. Thank you so much for agreeing to speak to us. Would you like to give us a little introduction?
Sure. Well, thank you very much, Debbie, for asking me to talk. I'm a solicitor who is now coming up to like nearly 30 years since I've been qualified. And over the past 20 years in particular, I've taken a real interest in cases involving people who have had adverse reactions to vaccines. And I've found it's like a really fascinating, interesting area of law, and I started because it became clear to me that in this country, in the United Kingdom, nobody was really getting any compensation for adverse reactions to vaccines. It just wasn't happening. However, it's pretty established in mainstream science that although generally with vaccines the benefits are considered by mainstream science to outweigh the risks, that it's always been accepted that there can be adverse reactions to vaccines, just like any medicine. Any medicine involves a balance of risks and benefits, and there can be side effects. And vaccines are not like some special class of medical products that never have any adverse reactions. And most developed countries around the world from about the late 70s to early 80s, most developed countries adopted systems of vaccine injury compensation. In particular, that was brought in the United States, where they have a special vaccine court. So I just became very interested in this question of why, what was it about the United Kingdom that was different, that meant that nobody was getting compensation? Because our law on the face of it looks very similar to other countries where compensation was available. So I didn't quite understand like why in this country there was hardly any compensation available. And I've just basically been focusing on trying where there's a case that I feel has scientific merit and is supported by sound science. I've just been focusing on trying to redress a balance that exists, because the pharmaceutical industry have great legal departments full of great lawyers, really well resourced. I mean, they're so fantastic. Similarly, the government, has enormous resources, like endless lawyers and people protecting the government's interests. Unfortunately, for injured people, however, there just isn't the provision. Legal aid for injury cases has been abolished, and that means that most cases would have to be funded on a no-win, no-fee basis. And generally speaking, lawyers in the UK would not run a vaccine case on a no-win, no-fee basis because of the very, very savagely poor success record that any solicitor in this country would think that it would just be a recipe for bankruptcy to do cases on that basis. But I suppose I like to try and sometimes run against the mainstream current. Maybe I'm a bit of a maverick, and I think you have to be sometimes to do these cases. But what I found is that when you do have a success, like we did in Alex's case, the victory is all the sweeter that it is a victory of David against Goliath. It is all the sweeter, and therefore, for me personally, it's been extremely rewarding work, and I think it's really important. And in the context of a pandemic where we've had an unprecedented level of vaccination with very new and untested and unknown vaccine products, and unfortunately, we've had a high level of adverse reactions. The need for advice, support, going through the inquest process, going through compensation claims is desperately needed. So I think it's hard for the vaccine injured and bereaved to find the committed representation that they need. If you go just to your local firm of solicitors in the high street, it's likely that after sort of 5 minutes talking to you, they'll just say, "I'm sorry, we can't deal with this," and they'll send you away. It's a very special type of expertise, I think, that you need to deal with some of these cases. But I think as Alex could tell you, there are things that you can do to actually completely transform the situation legally, and that's what I'm focusing my particular practice on at the moment. So dealing with inquests, claims for compensation under the Vaccine Damage Payment Act, and sort of challenging arbitrary refusals, challenging coroners by judicial review proceedings where they're trying to brush people off and tell them, that there's nothing to see here, and potentially taking proceedings against some of the pharmaceutical companies for producing defective products which have injured people.
Well, number one, I think we love Mavericks at UK Column. So thank you for being a Maverick, because you've joined a good team. We're all Mavericks here as well. And I think something else you said, which struck me from my own personal experience too, is that when you are involved with big pharma and you're involved with government, you have got this huge machine, this legal machine. They have these huge legal machines behind them, which basically leaves us, the public, pretty much stuck between a rock and a hard place. But I noticed that you say that you have received an increase because you're an experienced vaccine damage, vaccine injured solicitor. Would you say that you've seen a huge increase since this rollout of the mRNA, particularly, and AstraZeneca? Would you say that there was a big increase from the work that you've done before? And how busy are you at the moment?
We have a statutory compensation scheme where if you're injured by a vaccine, you can apply. It doesn't cost anything to apply, and if they accept that you're severely disabled as a result of vaccination, then you can receive a fixed statutory payment of £120,000. Now, in a standard year, there are between about 50 and 100 applications a year, and it's not terribly generous scheme. So the average number of awards is between 0 and 2 awards a year. So it doesn't cost the country very much generally. I think since the pandemic, there have been, I think, about 3,500 applications, and they've already made 33 awards for serious disablement caused by vaccination, according to the latest Freedom of Information request. So that is a many fold increase of the number of cases that have been applying and the number of awards that have been made. So that's all related to the pandemic.
Peter, why do you think we're not hearing about this? Because it's not in the media anymore. And as Alex has just said, they're worried that they're being swept under the carpet. The MHRA were publishing the figures. We could see the figures. They were huge amounts of figures. And that goes for globally as well with the VAERS data. So why do you think that it's being swept under the carpet? Why are we not hearing about these huge increases in figures?
Well, at the time of the pandemic and the vaccination campaigns, there was undoubtedly pressure in the media not to report cases of adverse reactions. I know I spoke to many journalists, and they would say, "Well, this is really interesting, Peter. I'd love to do a program about this. I'd love to feature this, but now is not the time," because they do not want there to be reports about this which were sort of stirring up concern and therefore causing people to become hesitant about vaccination. So there was a lot of pressure, I think, that was in the media not to report. But I think as the mass waves of vaccination have ceased, my prediction will be that there will be a sort of an incoming tide of stories that will gradually sort of go higher and higher, and there'll be more and more reports. Documentary films will be made until eventually the reporting was settled down to a more sort of normal basis. But I think it was a time of great sensitivity, and it's debatable whether there should be that much manipulation of the media that goes on, I think.
Yes, I think that's a very good point to make. I think, can I, first of all, for somebody like Alex, who's suddenly been bereaved, and Alex is looking after many other people who have suddenly been bereaved as well, and they're told by the doctor that condolences are given, etc. What does somebody do if they want to pursue a post-mortem, an inquest? Maybe they want to request it and they're grieving, they're already grieving. What are their first steps? Because I know that a lot of people watching this will be saying, well, yeah, we were at the hospital, or we discovered that our parent or our loved one had died, but we didn't know what to do next. We didn't know how to challenge the system. We didn't know how to request anything. But if the family feel that a post-mortem should be carried out and that they would like an inquest, and the hospitals say no, what do they do? What's their first steps?
I think it's completely understandable because us as humans, we don't have the death of our close loved ones very often. So this is not something that we regularly experience. So when it happens to you, this is a whole new sort of territory that you get into. And the answer to your question is really that people should go and see and talk to the coroner for their area. We have a local coroner system. The coroner's jurisdiction is a really ancient one. There's been coroners in this country since at least the 12th century. So it's a very ancient office, and that it's unusual court, in that most courts in this country are adversarial, but the coroner's system is actually inquisitorial, which is a different type of court than people are normally used to. But if somebody has concerns about whether somebody died as a result of a medical intervention, whether it was a medical accident or a vaccination or something like that, the first thing that they should do is go and talk to the coroner. Actually, the coroners do tend to be quite decent people. They are just people like me. They tend to be lawyers, or sometimes, occasionally, they're doctors. They're locally based, and it's their job to basically to carry out an investigation into why somebody came by their death. And this process of like establishing why somebody died is something that the coroners have set up to do where there is any doubt. And I think that where there is a question about whether a vaccine contributed or caused a death, there is a particular public interest in a thorough investigation being carried out, because it's not helpful if we don't know whether or not that was the case. So what I would say to families, first of all, is go and see the coroner, talk to them. They're a human being. They should be experienced in their jobs. Sit down and talk to them. Tell them all about the concerns about what happened. And when their loved one then dies, then it's likely that the coroner will probably start off by opening an investigation, and that may involve asking a pathologist to carry out a post-mortem report. And then once the coroner has the post-mortem report, then the coroner will then likely decide, is the evidence that the death is through a natural cause, or was there a non-natural factor, such as a vaccine or a medical accident, that caused or contributed to the death, such that there should be an investigation and an actual inquest held in public.
As you've said, Peter, this is a whole new world, and all of us, and none of us will have ever, hopefully, entered this world of inquests, coroners, and even something called a judicial review, which I'd like to ask you about as well. This is a whole new world. So do you literally mean that we phone up the coroner's office and we make an appointment with the coroner and we go and sit down? Is it that simple that we literally just phone the coroner's office?
Yeah, I would go to the coroner's office. It's generally sort of locally based. Go and talk to, there's you may be able to talk to the actual coroner themselves. He generally is just like a lawyer like me sitting in an office, or you'll talk to the coroner's officer, who tends to be like an ex-police officer who's used to sort of carrying out investigations on behalf of the coroner and sort of acting as the coroner's investigator. So talk to them and tell them your concerns. And the coroner's service are there to try and help, so they will try and help. I think where I might come in is where they refuse to help and where a dispute arises between the family and the coroner, because obviously there can be a situation where the coroner takes a particular view that, for example, that an inquest is not required or a post-mortem is not required, and the family don't feel that justice has been done, that sufficient investigations have not been carried out. Then it may be that the family want to then come to me, and I can then consider all of the medical evidence and the facts of the case, and I might be able to start off by making representations on their behalf. And if that doesn't work, because like as in Alex's case, the coroner still refused to listen to me and still said no, I'm not prepared to conduct an inquest. It may be that we can do the next step, which is to actually issue proceedings in the High Court against the coroner, where we asked the High Court to overturn a decision by the coroner on the basis that it's unlawful, that there should be an inquest, or there should be a post-mortem, or whatever it is. So the High Court is there to supervise all public officials and make sure that they conduct their statutory duties in a lawful and proper fashion. Legal aid is available for those on low incomes. So legal aid could be available to cover an action for judicial review, where you can ask the court to actually interfere with decisions made by the coroner. So, and that threat can sometimes, the threat of proceedings can sometimes persuade a coroner to back down as well, and to allow an investigation to go forward. So it can be sometimes worth going to see somebody like me to get advice and representation if your initial discussions with the coroner don't get the outcome that you want.
Peter, could you because it really is, it's a world that we don't see, it's behind closed doors. Could you just very in simple terms tell us, what can people expect from an inquest if we actually get to the point of an inquest? So a post-mortem's been done. Who chooses the pathologist that carries out that post-mortem, and what happens when you actually go to a coroner's inquest? Because it's quite it's an official, a formal environment, and it can be quite overwhelming for many people. Can you explain to us what the procedure's like, and what people should expect at an inquest, and what they should expect to hear possibly, and to prepare themselves for?
Yeah, an inquest it's a really unusual form of proceedings. I always feel like it's a bit of a cross between a church service and a court hearing, because there is a real solemnity to an inquest, because obviously it's about somebody who's died, and somebody who's often much loved by their family and relatives and friends. So there's always a great solemnity of an occasion, but the law specifies that actually at an inquest, the coroner is quite limited in what they have to do. So they have to basically identify the deceased, so that the deceased has to be identified, and the coroner has to determine where they died, when they died, and how they came by their death. So the circumstances touching on their death. That is the whole remit of an inquest, and it's important that to note that the law actually prevents the coroner from attributing blame to any party. So you can't. It's not there to attribute blame, but it is there to establish the facts about what happened. And it is really the one opportunity that a family will have to really get to the heart of why somebody died. What were the causes of their death? And if there isn't an inquest, you never get that chance to really ask the questions of the doctors or the pathologists to really understand the reasons. So I think most people, although they find it quite an ordeal to go through, they do realise that actually it's valuable, because it was the one opportunity that they had to establish why that their loved one died. And if there wasn't an inquest, I think, and there's always questions about why a person then died, then that's a really unsatisfactory sort of uncertainty to always be there. And certainly from a vaccine injury point of view, it is very helpful for there to be an inquest, because if there isn't an inquest, the imputation is, or the inference is, that the death must have been through a natural cause rather than the vaccine being a cause, which is clearly a non-natural cause. So if there wasn't an inquest, it's very unlikely, I think, that you will be successful in an application for compensation under the Vaccine Damage Payment Act, because the official legal position is that the person died of natural causes rather than because of a vaccine. So it's quite important for the vaccine injured to fight to have an inquest, and to fight that in the verdict of the inquest, when it's decided as to why the person died, that it includes that the person died because of an adverse reaction to a vaccine. So that is actually really important that that's noted down. It gives some clarity to the family about why that their loved one died, and it also puts the family, it does mean that it's likely that their application for compensation will go through pretty quickly through the statutory process, because already another court has determined, the court, the coroner's court, the official court, another court has determined that it was the vaccine which was a cause of the death. So it's very likely that a compensation payment will be made. So it's really important not to be rushed away. And throughout the pandemic, I have been consulted by many families who have been concerned that their loved one was vaccinated and that contributed to their loved one dying, and yet they've been disappointed that the coroner has not been willing to consider that as a cause. And unfortunately, many doctors, many coroners were not aware of, for example, cases of thrombosis and thrombocytopenia from the AstraZeneca vaccine, or myocarditis or pericarditis from the mRNA vaccines. They simply weren't aware of that. So they were certifying deaths as being from a natural cause, where somebody may have, for example, died of a thrombosis 10 days after AstraZeneca, or if somebody had a heart attack after a Pfizer vaccine, for example, they were certifying those as natural cause, whereas actually there were real serious questions that should have been considered at an inquest as to whether the vaccine was a contributory factor. So over the past 18 months, I have been fighting battles up and down the country on behalf of families with coroners, where we're actually asking them to review the evidence again and to look at what is basically an emerging picture of scientific evidence that they may not have been aware of, from, say, January 2021, when the AstraZeneca vaccine was first in mass use. Simply, it was not then widely known or understood that the vaccine was triggering cases of thrombosis and thrombocytopenia. So there has been a looking back now, and actually there's been many cases where deaths were certified as being just from a natural cause. There was no inquest. Coroners have since been realizing that we should have realized that actually the vaccine was a cause. So it is possible, even after the event, to go back to the coroner and say, actually, we want this looked at again, and we think that maybe a mistake was made at the time, and that this wasn't properly looked at. And I think I've got an inquest happening in a couple of weeks, which the case was all closed off in January 2021, and it was only subsequently that it dawned on everybody concerned that it was actually the AstraZeneca vaccine had triggered the thromboses which was actually responsible for the person's death, and now we have to go back and look at it all again. So there's a lot of these cases, I think, where people out there may need to have conversations about whether they need to go back to the coroner and say, actually, in the light of what we now know about myocarditis or thrombosis or vasculitis, Guillain-Barré syndrome, acute allergic reaction, multi-system inflammatory syndrome, autoimmune hepatitis, autoimmune encephalitis. I could go on for quite a long time listing conditions that actually doctors, pathologists, coroners need to be looking again at those cases in the light of the emerging scientific evidence. This is sound science, and saying, actually, at the time we didn't really realise that, but now we've got more scientific evidence, and we realise that actually we need to review the position. We need to substitute our initial decision for, yes, it was contributed to by an adverse reaction to a vaccination.
I think it's very reassuring to know that even if a case is closed and appears closed, then there is a possibility of revisiting it. But it takes me into a bit of a sensitive subject, and it's a subject that a few people have asked me when they've lost their relatives, in that they're told that there will be a post-mortem, or they've requested a post-mortem, and already that doesn't sit very well with them because of the context of what's happening to their loved one. But then they worry about, if there's going to be an inquest and there's been a post-mortem, will they be able to bury their loved one? Will they be able to have a funeral? Will they be able to say goodbye? What's the procedure with regards to that? What should people expect? How long does this take? And when does a body get released so the family can say goodbye?
Generally, the body will be released after the post-mortem. So the sequence will be the person dies, then the post-mortem will be carried out, and then after that, the body will be released and buried. So having an inquest does not hold up a funeral generally. There are very exceptional cases where a family may be unhappy with a particular pathologist report and may want to ask for a second post-mortem. And in those circumstances, coroners are sometimes willing to accept the family to arrange a second post-mortem. That is possible, but I don't think that families should worry that their loved one will not be able to be buried. The funeral, etc., can happen, and the inquest will happen later. So it's not the case that a funeral can't happen until after an inquest. No, the funeral will take place, and then the inquest will be later.
What about, because we have been asked this question before, when it has been subject to an inquest, what about cremation? Because we know that doctors are paid a fee for cremation certificates, we believe. What's your advice regards to that? Because families do ask, should we choose a burial over a cremation, or once our loved one's cremated, is that the end of the case? There's nothing further that we can do. I know it's not a very pleasant question, but it is one that we're being asked, and I wondered if you had any advice on that.
I have never myself in 30 years had a case of an exhumation and that proving valuable. So I don't actually think if there was a cremation that would be something that would concern me at all. If a family wanted to have a cremation over a burial, then I think that I don't see any issue with that. Obviously, the natural decomposition processes mean that there is very unlikely to be any useful pathologic evidence after a while in any event. So your chance to get that is generally right at the shortly after the death. And once that's done, then the appropriate thing would be for the person to be either buried or cremated in accordance with their wishes.
Thank you for that, Peter. Also, Alex, when she's been talking about the work that you've been doing for her, she said to me she never even knew the term judicial review, as many people don't. It was a completely new term to her. Could you explain what a judicial review is and when you might need to use that process?
Sure. Judicial review is a really, really valuable instrument of every citizen of this country. It's something that we should all know about. You've probably heard like Latin terms like habeas corpus, which is sort of let us have the body. I think it's the Latin for it's basically if somebody was unlawfully detained, you can issue a writ of habeas corpus and it will bring you before a court, and the detention then has to be justified under the law. And similarly with judicial review, it's basically that the High Court is there to supervise public bodies. And there's a Latin maxim, quod rex non debet esse sed sub homine, sed sub deo et lege, which means the king is under no one except God and the law. Okay, that's a very important principle, that no matter it's the prime minister or the head of the army, nobody is above the law. That's a very fundamental principle of this country, that the law is sovereign and nobody is above the law. No matter whether you're the government or a pharmaceutical company, you cannot break the law. And a judicial review is the way that we as citizens enforce that. So if we think that our government or anybody is infringing our legal rights, then you can go to the High Court, make an application, and there is a two-stage process. So first of all, you have to ask for permission to have a judicial review. But actually the test that you have to persuade the court is quite a low threshold. You just have to show that you've got an arguable case. So you don't have to show that you will win. You just have to show that, yeah, it's an arguable point. If it's an arguable point, then a High Court judge sitting in the High Court will say, yeah, okay, it's an arguable case. We'll give you permission to argue it. And then you'll come back to court with the state or whoever it is that you're seeking to challenge, and the High Court is there to basically determine as to whether or not the state is acting unlawfully. And obviously the court's there to uphold your human rights and your legal rights, and often it's a very effective way of holding the state and office holders to account, because if you're a coroner, for example, you have a lot of powers, you have great powers, but you have to use the powers reasonably and lawfully and for the purpose in which they are intended, and you have to make decisions rationally. So in Alex's case, we had a coroner who was refusing to hold an inquest, even though we had a post-mortem report which said that the cause of death was partly due to vaccination. And we tried to persuade the coroner, and we asked nicely and repeatedly, but the coroner would not agree. So if we did not have judicial review, we would have just been steamrolled. But just by issuing proceedings, we never actually needed to actually get to court. Just by issuing and serving proceedings, the coroner immediately capitulated, because the coroner knew that we were right and that there had to be an inquest. And so judicial review is an important tool to uphold legal rights. Legal aid is still available for it. If you win, you'll get your costs back. So it is something which you can use if you feel that an authority, a government department, is not upholding your legal rights, or not acting reasonably, or not making a decision which is rational. So it's a fundamental way in which the law in this country remains effective, and therefore it's really, really important. It's really important to uphold, and I think it's jealously guarded judicial review, and that's why it's if judicial review goes and we've got no ability to hold, like, the state to comply with the law, then the rule of law has ceased to exist in this country. So it is absolutely fundamental to the rule of law.
Just listening to you, I think it just highlights, people in this position who are grieving, who are sad, who are frustrated, and who've got so much on their minds. It's quite clear that people are going to need to seek advice from solicitors, specialist solicitors like you. Now, like the medical world, Peter, I'm always having to signpost patients and members of the public to different departments, or you need to see a hematologist, or maybe you need to see a neurologist. And I found the legal world is similar. So who do people ask to come and see? Because there are different departments with different specialities and expertise. If they can't come and see you, who, when they look in the old-fashioned, I'm still old-fashioned, and they look in the old yellow pages, what kind of solicitor should they be looking for, with what qualifications?
It's what we call public and administrative law. So most solicitors, if they practice in the area, will have a website which makes clear that this is an area of their practice. So the High Court used to be very London-centric in the UK, but actually recently there's been a move to try and move the administrative court out into the regions. So you will find centres of administrative justice throughout the UK. So you probably will find them in the major cities. So if you live in a sort of a very rural community with a small local firm of solicitors, it's probably unlikely that you would find the right sort of specialist there. But if you say you lived in the northwest of England, if you went to Manchester, for example, there's undoubtedly firms there that would have that specialism, or Leeds, or Bristol, or all of the big centres. Obviously, particularly London is where there is that specialism. But it does exist outside London, but probably not in small local areas, small local rural towns. I don't think you would find it there. You might find conveyancers, or you might find family lawyers, or magistrates court criminal lawyers in local towns, but you probably wouldn't find the people doing judicial review where you'll find those mainly in London and the major cities.
Peter, we've concentrated a lot today, quite rightly, on the bereaved and what people should expect with regards to seeing a coroner and going to an inquest. But we also know that you do an awful lot of work with the living, with those that are vaccine injured. And likewise, these are people that are generally very sick, and trying to find some help, some medical help, to make them feel better. And often they're struggling, trying to find that help. And then they're having to navigate their way through the whole vaccine damage payment scheme, and having to navigate phone calls and forms. How can you help the vaccine injured? Because I know that you have a lot, but what can they expect when they come and seek your help?
You don't have to have a solicitor act for you if you're making an application for compensation under the statutory scheme. Um, so it is quite possible to fill out the application form yourself and send it off to the NHS Business Services Authority, who now administer the scheme, and there's no fee for applying. And I have known many, many people who have applied successfully in person without getting any legal advice. So it's not a complicated form. Having said that, I do think that it can help for a solicitor such as me to prepare the form. If I'm honest, and I look at the form when it's been drafted by lay clients, I I sort of think, well, that was never going to work, because that they've not really, included a detailed supporting statement. Generally speaking, there will only be like 2 or 3 sentences, and I think there's opportunity lost there to make lots of really salient points to persuade. So I do think I can assist. So people do frequently come to see me, and I say, okay, well, you've got a choice. You could either do it yourself, or you could pay me to do it. And sometimes like an hour or 2 of my time can like speed through an application. And similarly, if they are refused, they can come back to me and we can sort of sit down together. We can review their application. We can review the decision that's been made, and I can advise them. And sometimes I'll say, listen, there's no realistic prospect of you ever succeeding with this case because of X, Y, and Z. And I think it does help people if they can hear it and understand, the reasons why it's not going to be successful. On the other hand, I might say, oh no, this decision is just absolutely diabolical. I mean, some of the decisions that are made are, really tragically bad. And therefore I can help draft a request for reconsideration, or if they won't change their mind on reconsideration, then there is a process where you can appeal to an independent tribunal. So if there's a case that I believe that there is a reasonable prospect of success in a tribunal, then I have quite often agreed to do that on a no-win, no-fee basis. And the good thing about the tribunal is you can appeal to a tribunal, and they are completely independent. It'll just be a sort of a legal chairperson plus 2 doctors. And if you lose the appeal, if you don't persuade them, you're not ordered to pay costs or anything. So they just dismiss your case. So you are entitled to have a day in court, and I do think people should have that day in court. If they honestly believe that they have a serious disablement from a vaccine, it's definitely worth going and arguing your case. I find it like a really fascinating day. I mean, it often involves really interesting principles of science, of neurology, epidemiology, immunology. So it's really interesting, and I think often I've won, and it's great to win if you've been refused and you've won. I mean, it means a lot to somebody to have their severe disablement officially recognised as having been, what the cause of that disablement is. It's not a small matter just to have that official recognition. And even though that you only get £120,000, which is not at all adequate to cover severe disablement, it does, take anybody quite a lot of time to save up £120,000 of tax-paid money. So it's not a wholly negligible amount, and therefore it is worth pursuing, I think.
I think one of the questions that we always get asked with regards to vaccine damage is somebody that's got a vaccine injury is generally asked to prove or to say that they're 60%, they have a 60% disability. I've always struggled with this because if someone's 59% disabled or someone's 61% disabled, how do you determine that?
Unfortunately, our statutory scheme is really crap. I mean, it's so crap. I mean, it's just the worst law ever. I mean, really, if you sort of left a 4-year-old together with some paint pots, they could come up with a better scheme than we currently have in this country. But basically, what they did with the legislation is they bolted onto the legislation the industrial injuries compensation scale. So the DWP have had this scale of compensation for a long, long time. It goes back to the days when people generally sort of worked down the mines and in factories, and they would quite often suffer physical sort of crushing injuries due to poor health and safety. So, and they would not get any industrial compensation because of the fact that their employers would disappear or whatever. So I think the trade unions and the labour movement probably pressured to bring in this industrial injuries compensation scheme, and there's a scale of physical injury that goes from 1%, the most trivial sort of physical injury, up to 100%. And originally, when the Vaccine Damage Payment Act came in, you had to be 80% on the scale to qualify, and that's because really it was focused on compensating babies who had severe brain injury from the whooping cough vaccine in the 70s. But in 2000, the then Labour government changed the scheme so that they reduced it so that you only had to get to the point of 60% on the scale to qualify. And so 60% on the scale, there's two injuries. One is loss of a hand and the other one is loss of a leg below the knee. Typically, those two injuries are really quite different because, it's ridiculous that they're given the same amount. So loss of a hand in a human is quite disabling. These days, loss of a leg below the knee isn't actually that disabling because, like with a prosthetic, you would be able to live. You're able to live a pretty normal life. It doesn't have any. You don't have to take any medication. You can drive a car. You can work. You can run. You can walk. You're not cognitively affected at all. So actually, and it's important that people understand this, that the 60% on the scale is not a high level. Okay, even though that it's severe disablement, okay, it's not actually severe disablement. Because what you have to do in the case of a vaccine injury compensation claim, you have to basically look at the total disablement that the person has, and then you have to basically compare that to the level of disablement that somebody might have if they'd lost a leg below the knee, and you have to make an assessment about whether it's at least as bad as that. I've actually found that if you can get them to accept that the vaccine was the cause of the disablement, then I have rarely failed to persuade them ultimately that the injury is insufficiently serious. So I don't actually think it's such a high level. And I do think it's always worth arguing the case. So in a case where somebody, for example, is taking regular medication or unable to drive or has cognitive difficulties, I think you can generally establish that that injury is actually worse than the injury that's at 60% on the scale. So I think that should it's quite important. I like to explain this to people because it's quite important that they understand that. So, because a lot of people think, oh, 60% means I've got to be at least like paralyzed below the arms or something like that. Well, that's completely beyond 60%. That's probably about 180% or something like that. So it's not actually such a high level. And generally speaking, if you're assiduous and you keep going and you get as far as the tribunal, you probably will just about persuade them that actually it is 60%. So it's worth to keep going.
Peter, I'm keeping an eye on the time because I know you're a very busy gentleman, and I'm looking at the time now. But I think today's interview with you and the information has been incredibly valuable, and to get a glimpse into your world is absolutely fascinating. And I can't thank Alex enough. And we're going to come back to Alex in a minute. But before I do hand back over to Alex, I'd really like to ask you if there's anything that you would like to say on a final word, because I'm hoping very much that we'll be able to hook up again and we'll be able to speak to you again, because this clearly is a huge subject, and it's a subject that I don't know any members of the public that know behind the closed doors of the legal world, especially inquests and how coroners work. So I would really love to think that you would agree to come back and talk to us again some more, because the information that you've given us has been absolutely fascinating, and the time that you've given us is incredibly valuable. Is there anything that you would like to say on a final word before I do hand back over to Alex for the final word?
If somebody is watching this and if they have a similar issue or know somebody who has, then they're very welcome to get in touch with me, and I will try and help them as much as I possibly can. And it may be that if somebody cares about it and they want to help people, then the charity which Alex is setting up, it may be that they just want to subscribe and give £1 a month, and that's something that they can do for very little money, practically, to actually help people. So I definitely would recommend Alex's memorial to her mother, and I think that's a fantastic response that she has had to actually put in place an opportunity for people who might be in a similar situation to her and her family, where they're being brushed off, to actually be supported and to enable them to get justice and the recognition that they need. It's a very very worthwhile cause. So I'm always ready to try and do my best to help anybody. So if you Google me, like Peter Todd Solicitor, you'll find me, and you can email me or subscribe to Alex's charity. That would be something really positive that you could do. And the other thing I would say is go and see your MP and talk to them, because I do honestly believe that if we don't sort of lobby for change politically, then nothing will change. And it's really important, like if somebody has had an experience like Alex, it's really important that their MP knows about it, that they go and talk to them so they know it's real. And I think only by doing that will we actually be able to persuade for there to be sort of real change. And the law, the statutory scheme, I said it was crap. We need to change it. We need to reform it. We need to make it more human. Like you said, Debbie, the burden of proof is on the injured party, whereas in the USA, the burden of proof is actually on the state to prove that it wasn't the vaccine, and that they have quite a generous system in that close calls are always given in favour of the patient. And I think that that's the right approach. We should be generous, and we can afford, as a wealthy country, we can afford to support people who are in that situation. So I do think that we need to sort of engage with MPs, and they need to hear the stories. They need to hear the family stories of how people have been affected. It's only then that we'll actually see real change. I think real change is actually quite possible, but we won't get any change if people don't sort of go and engage or try and bring change about.
Well, fortunately, all of our audience are very proactive, and I know that they will take this on board because you're right. Obviously, changes have to be made, but I think a lot of people that are watching this will be very relieved to have seen that there are people like you who are there to help them, and it's just a matter of knowing where to find people like you. So for anybody watching, don't worry, we'll put all of Peter's details on the little article beneath this video. And thank you so much, Peter. We are so grateful. And I'm just going to hand back very briefly, if I may, to Alex. And Alex, I'm so sorry, because I know that this is still incredibly raw for you. You didn't just lose your mum, you lost your brother as well. And through all of this, you've brought to the UK column Peter, who's just incredible. And thank you so much. But more to the point, your mum's memorial and what you're doing in order to gather some funds. In fact, you're almost setting up your very own legal aid service, aren't you, for people that are in a similar position that can't afford to see Peter. So I want to thank you both so much for today's interview, because I think it's been incredibly helpful and incredibly useful. And I'd like to encourage everybody to share it wherever they can, the information, and to consider becoming a patron. All the details will be in the article beneath the video. So on that note, Alex, I would like as ever to give you the final word and to thank you so much for your bravery, your courage, your determination, and your love and your kindness when you've been organising all of this. So, Alex, it's over to you for the last word, and thank you.
Thank you, Debbie, and thanks to Peter for his time, because it is so valuable. And it's great that people will be able to hear what he said today. I mean, just that alone is well, information is power. So thank you to him as well. But yes, my mum's memorial fund, it's her way of helping now for the vaccine injured and bereaved. I've had my truth, and it goes an awful long way to helping. It's helped me to move forward somewhat in my life. And I was sort of trying to say earlier that my brother knew before he died that Peter had secured an inquest, and that brought him a lot of peace. So that information for people is crucial, whether it's good news or not. At least you know where you stand legally. And that is what we want to support with the fund. Getting somebody like Peter on board is just crucial. Who knows how to navigate the medical world legally? I certainly didn't. So I'm forever grateful to him. And yes, it is for the vaccine injured and bereaved. You may think a pound is nothing, but every pound will count. And we need the help for the vaccine injured and the vaccine bereaved now, not in 5-10 years' time when the government decide to get their act together. And if you can't contribute, I appreciate times are tight. Please share the platform, because you will reach people that I can't. And also people will be able to hear of Peter and be able to share the platform as well. Social media has been amazing. And they will also know who to contact if they themselves are injured or bereaved. So even just sharing it is massively important, but every single pound counts. And thank you to those that have already started. We already have patrons on board, so thank you very much. And thank you, UK Column, for giving us a platform.